Hi there. Welcome back to Prices at the Pumps, our weekly look here at SaltWire. All things energy related. Scott Squires, please be joined, as always, by the energy expert, Dan McTeague. Dan, you and I were just talking before we started recording this about some things that we want to get to, but as we do each week, let's jump right in. Prices set in Atlantic Canada tomorrow and Friday. What are consumers going to expect when they go pull in and lift that nozzle to put gas or diesel in their car?
Not a big shocking surprise. Gasoline in Newfoundland, I think, will drop about, it's looking like only about 0.4 cents a liter. So nothing really shocking out of that. We'll have to wait to see what happens today on energy markets because it's the last of 4 or 5 days here that they'll choose to put together their prices for New Brunswick, PEI, and Nova Scotia on Friday. But I'm not expecting much in the way of any change, maybe a little bit of an acceleration to the downside. I see the markets are heading a different direction. With diesel, you're looking at it going up about 2/3 of a cent, maybe 3/4 of a cent in Newfoundland. So I would say the same applies to the other provinces. Again, nothing major, but it does signal markets don't know really what to do. And we are all waiting on the delayed OPEC plus meeting, which will take place in about 17, 18, 19 hours. So tomorrow, we should have a better understanding of whether or not they're going to continue with production cuts, increase production, or as some are suggesting, decrease production even further, given the dysfunctionality of North American, European energy markets and the fact that hedgers have been driving down the price of energy, notwithstanding fundamentals of supply and demand, particularly on the supply side.
Dan, we are getting into chillier days, chillier nights. People are going to need more home heating fuel. Not everybody uses it, of course, but a lot of people do put oil in their tanks to heat their home. What are you seeing on the home heating oil front?
Yeah, stable for now. That's because we're looking at a cold snap in Europe and North America, but by the end of this week is likely to turn into something a little warmer. So for now, we're going to have to take this week by week. We're not into the cold days yet, but come middle of December, I'm not a subscriber of the Farmer's Almanac, but given the kind of warm weather we saw because of El Nino this summer, we're likely to see the reverse effect of a much colder winter. And I think there seems to be a view that January, February, and March could be, uncomfortably cold. So I think for now, we're good until Christmas. Prices aren't likely to rise. However, that one thing, we'll have to wait and see what happens tomorrow with OPEC. And the reaction could be muted. It could actually see prices fall, or it could see them dramatically rise. I'm going with the idea that it's going to remain pretty much the same. But as we head towards January and February, colder weather, look for diesel, heating oil, propane, natural gas, and the like to go about maybe 4 to 5% higher than what we're paying today.
As you mentioned, things could change with that OPEC plus meeting coming up tomorrow. But I know that you're looking at the markets all the time, Dan. Where is the price sitting right now for a barrel of oil?
So it's been, if I look this morning, it was up to $77.50 a barrel, now down to about $77 a barrel. It's really all over the map. It was up $1.50 a barrel this morning, now down $0.50 a barrel, as we head into the later morning. There is no real rhyme or reason. They can't find traction, and they've been unable to do this for quite some time. So it's going to take a much larger, more realistic measure. You have on the one side supply, which is not as strong. Kazakhstan, other countries are not producing as much. You have some cheating going along with the OPEC members, particularly African members. And here we're looking at Nigeria and Angola. And then you have on the other side of this pushing back, saying, demand will drop because of the mixed signals coming from the U.S. Fed saying, yeah, we might increase rates. No, we're not going to increase rates, or, anything like that could have longer term consequences. We've seen this kind of tomfoolery in the market for the past year. It's the reason OPEC has decided to try to, where it could, especially with Saudi Arabia, cut back on production to get their market straight. But, they're up against quite quite a tall order. U.S. Producers are producing a lot of that oil that no one wants, that fracked oil with that you can only produce gasoline with and diesel, so they're exporting it around the world. We're looking at scenarios developing where, of course, with warmer weather, we haven't seen the kind of drawdown in inventories. So all of these things are really conspiring to make it very confusing for energy traders. But then there's the big one, the AIs, the artificial intelligence, which has a very large pronounced role here, and hedgers, the short sellers, who treat energy like it's a meme stock and always want to short it because, of course, as they get their bets correct, prices fall, they make their money that way. I'm not sure how this is going to end, but I know that if Saudi Arabia and a few others had their way, notwithstanding Iran, they would definitely want to see prices back up towards $90 a barrel, not 70.
Well, I'm sure we'll be talking about what comes out of this meeting, the OPEC Plus meeting tomorrow. We'll chat about that next week. And Dan, move on to the next topic. You and I, for a long time, have been talking about the Clean Fuel Standard Act, carbon taxes, well before it was implemented in July. And, you and I have discussed some of the backlash, some of the pushback, things that have gone on, and seeing some things interestingly happening with provincial government bodies. And again, I mentioned this particular one in Saskatchewan because you never know the trickle down or the ripple effect that it could have here in Atlantic Canada. So yesterday, Premier Scott Moe from Saskatchewan, he puts out, "Today, our government has announced the Economic Assessment Tribunal, which will protect the economic future of families, communities, and businesses in Saskatchewan," and goes on to say, "As a key component of the Saskatchewan First Act, this 5-person tribunal will analyze the harm of federal policies and legislation on Saskatchewan's strong and growing economy, starting with the federal clean electricity regulations." Now, again, this is Saskatchewan, but I think there's some interesting tones here, Dan. What do you take from that, and what are you seeing happening on a larger focus across the country?
Yeah, I think this, Scott, is speaking to the fact that provinces that have different mix of energy, for instance, they're not using nuclear, they're not using hydroelectric, mostly because of the geology and the reality of their areas. They're saying for the federal government to impose these arbitrary regulations, all 117 of them, to meet the net zero target, whatever that should mean, they're going to do what they want as they can do it and on their time, but they're not going to be rushed by trendies in Ottawa telling them when they have to do it. So, Alberta and Saskatchewan aren't just two provinces that share their energy, prowess. They also happens to be some of the coldest regions in the country. So to shift away dramatically with a wave of magic wand to have everybody turn their electrical infrastructure into solar and wind and get rid of coal and natural gas is really, for many people, not just a bridge too far. It's suicidal. And so in the case of Alberta, it's Sovereignty Act yesterday, Scott Moe's Saskatchewan First resolution, the creation of this tribunal, and with two now decisions by the courts pushing back on the federal government, the plastics ban, and earlier on the pipeline issue. I remember it off the top of my head where the Supreme Court said that's trembling. You're treading into provincial territory. I think the provinces have now read the room and are realizing that they have to stand up for their own interests because Ottawa's not going to do it. Quite to the contrary, Ottawa, the Liberals, the NDP, and the Greens are willing to attack the energy sector and, as a result, the prosperity of those provinces. It's surprising, though, because Ontario uses a lot of natural gas. So is even Quebec. So why they're not standing up is one thing. But I think Saskatchewan and Alberta are taking a page out of the Quebec playbook. We're not going to sit here and take it anymore. We've had enough. And that's the way the Federation is supposed to work, by the way. It's not the federal government saying we're on the side of virtue on climate, therefore we can do anything we want. There are guardrails and there are boundaries, and they have to respect them.
Each province is different, of course. Each province has its own reasons for going down paths that they go down. But I ask you this, when you see Saskatchewan coming out like this and Alberta, what do you think the other provinces are doing? Like for example, here in the Atlantic region, the 4 Atlantic provinces have gotten together and have talked to the federal government about how they feel about the carbon tax and what they'd like to see happen. You spent 18 years in federal politics, and I'm sure you had to deal with the provinces and provincial bodies at some point or another. But your best guess, what do you think that these Atlantic premiers are thinking or maybe talking about when they see Saskatchewan doing this, Alberta doing this, and as you said, maybe taking a bit of a page from the Quebec playbook? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think Atlantic premiers have already sort of set our backs to the wall, and in the case of clean fuel regulation, not just the first round, which I helped them with. Let me be emphatic about that. The work that we had done with LFX and Associates to demonstrate that the first clean fuel regulation back then, standard back then, now called regulation, had not done a cost-benefit analysis, and had it done so to realize taxing people's home heating fuel, that is a second carbon tax, is insane. So the federal government removed that, but it still, stings when you have the first carbon tax applying. That's why the federal government made the second exemption. Well, I think there's strength in numbers, and when provinces decide to stand up, not because they're against a particular policy, but the way in which it's implemented and the effect it has on people. If federal Liberals are not prepared to stand up for constituents and are finding policies more important than their impacts on people, then the provinces are going to do it for them. And I think in this case, we've seen with the exemption given to the provinces, particularly for home heating fuel, it's a victory for the premiers who put aside the political differences and said this is not something we can afford to do. So Saskatchewan, Alberta, Atlantic Canada, I think each and every one is sort of having in their own way to say, these are great policies, but you've got to contextualize them. You in Ottawa have got to do a better job at looking before you leap, because frankly, every time you've done it, it's hurt a lot of people. And I think it's from a political standpoint, from my many years there, it's not surprising to see the federal Liberals now, trending in levels that are at or below those of the NDP support. It's very reminiscent of 2011 when I lost my seat, for instance, when we had those kind of numbers. So I think it's game over. Affordability is an important issue across this country. And if the federal government is going to do something to aggravate that or make it worse, that's one thing. The provinces are going to have none of it. Neither are their constituents.
Dan, before I move on here and talk about copper, I want to say a big thank you to all of the viewers and listeners of Prices at the Pumps here in SaltWire. We always appreciate having you with us. And something that we noticed recently, Dan, of all of the folks on YouTube who watch the full-length video with you and I, who watch the YouTube shorts, 96% of them are not subscribing to the SaltWire YouTube channel. So, Dan, I want you to give your best pitch why people should subscribe to the SaltWire YouTube channel. It's great that they're watching, but 96% of them aren't subscribers. So tell them why they should subscribe, Dan.
Look, you have to do this, folks. I don't normally have this opportunity to provide, the bird's eye view of energy policies as they affect you, everyone, each and every one of you in terms of money. If people had spent some time listening to Dan McTeague and to Scott Squires here at SaltWire, we could have avoided things like the clean fuel regulation being implemented. We predicted this was going to happen. What happens across the country gets first discussed here from an energy perspective. And some people are going to say, well, that's just one issue. But energy falls into every other category. Don't take my word for it. Don't take Scott's word for it. Your food costs, everything, the inflation, interest rates are all connected one way or another to the price of gasoline and diesel to a large extent. So, please subscribe. It's free, but it's important that we also get an opportunity to acknowledge that, yes, you like what we're saying, but show us some love here. It's almost Christmas. Give us that gift of doing something for free and sign up on YouTube. How's that, Scott?
Couldn't have said it any better myself. Really appreciate that. And again, we really do appreciate all the viewers and listeners to Prices at the Pumps. It does mean a lot. Now, let's move on. You mentioned net zero in one of your other comments there a little bit ago. And something jumped out at me on X recently, a really good follow for me anyway, is mikesmoneytalks.ca. And something that he put out, and I know that you've talked about this on your account as well, but I'll just read the post here quickly. It starts off by saying, we need 2 times the copper. Then it says, in all of human history, we've produced 700 million tons of copper. To reach net zero by 2050, we'd need to produce 1.4 billion tons of copper over the next 27 years, doubling all of human history production. And then he's got a nice infographic there that shows, what we produced in all of humankind so far and what we're going to need in the next about 30 years. Dan, I know you've been talking about the need for copper and other things that it takes to get to net zero, but when you see and hear something like that, What are your immediate thoughts?
Well, listen, if you're going to make this so-called energy transition by 2050 to net zero, most of it's going to be done through electrification. And most of that electrification is done with copper. Therefore, the fact that no one's making any new copper mines, we see the Canadian company running into trouble yesterday in Panama, the Supreme Court there striking down from a constitutional perspective, the planned project there. When people think of electric vehicles, they think of lithium. Don't. There's tons of it around there. It's pretty cheap and easy to make, and everyone's got it, but they don't have copper. And copper you need for everything, for your motors to run, for your distribution, for your chargers. Anything that isn't done over large distances in terms of electricity is done with copper. Otherwise, we're using aluminum. So if you think that, what you've just indicated is just sort of some random, hey, guess what? I figured this out. Most people are very concerned that the amount of copper that doesn't exist out there. Take some copper from your home and take it to a scrapper's, and you'll get $5, $6, $7, $8, $9 a pound, depending on the condition. 30 years ago, you could buy it for pennies. So the reality here, I think, is that unless we're prepared to make some significant moves towards smeltering. Copper, by the way, has been around as long as humanity. It's one of the first things we've ever mined and used. It's malleable, very functional, but its short supply does suggest that we're heading for a crisis in terms of the supplies we need to make that so-called transition. And if we're going to make that transition, it's going to become even more costly. And by the way, mining isn't without environmental impacts. Mining is considered perhaps the dirtiest form of energy creation. So we have a lot more time to think about this before we lurch ahead at some international conference like the COP28 and pretend that we can make these transitions without recognizing simple realities of the fundamental materials that we need.
Dan, you set me up with the segues. So great. We don't even plan it ahead of time. The next thing I wanted to talk about you before we head toward the wrap of the show is COP28. And again, another post on X from Patrick Moore, someone that you're familiar with. Yeah. And he pulls a quote from an article from thedailycaller.com. Upcoming UN climate confab could have largest carbon footprint in the event's history. Up to 70,000 will attend Dubai UN climate conference, doubling the previous attendance, with largest assembly of private jets ever. And then he editorializes a bit and says, nice role model, billionaires. Again, that's editorializing a bit from Patrick Moore. But fact remains, up to 70,000 people, an amazingly high amount of private jets, a carbon footprint, massive. Dan, make it make sense.
Well, look, Patrick Moore is no fool. He's Canadian. He was co-founder of Greenpeace. Now, of course, Greenpeace does not like him because he doesn't take and buy the malarkey. That we have to basically stifle ourselves in order to save the planet. Quite to the contrary, he believes that CO2 is not the menace that many believe it to be. But if the confab in Dubai is meant to be anything, it'll be an example of just how the issue of climate has become analogous to the old military industrial complex. It's now a thing, and it runs on its own. And it's excessive and it's grotesque, and it's not going to accomplish anything more than to be a bit of a gab fest in which you're trying to tell oil producers, hey, you shouldn't be in business, while at the same time you wouldn't be able to get there without the very things that they admonish. I'm not sure what the easy solution is, but I mean it's capital H hypocritical for people to show up there in jets that are fossil fuel intensive and then complain about how everyone else should live. I think it's arrogant, and it's demonstrating once again just how out of touch these global elites are, even when they show up there. Now, it'll be interesting of the 70,000. Will Canada again be disproportionately the largest delegation there at a time in which our food banks are lined up, at a time in which Canadians are concerned about the future, at a time in which inflation seems to be running out of control, at a time in which our debt and deficit are hitting levels that may soon have, and I'll say it here first on SaltWire, we'll soon have, no doubt, bond rating agencies revisiting our AAA credit rating. I think this is time for Canadians to remind their politicians and the trendies who want to, swill back Perrier and pop a couple of canapes to get real. And maybe they should do this by Zoom next time, the way you and I do it all the time.
Dan, always appreciate your insights. You have decades of knowledge and insights into this entire world. And again, we appreciate having you here on SaltWire. But when folks want to catch you somewhere else other than right here on SaltWire, where can they find you?
Affordableenergy.ca is my website, president at affordableenergy.ca or info at affordableenergy.ca. Gas price predictions, which I'll put up later based on what we've said here in SaltWire. You can find it at gaswizard.ca. And of course, on Twitter, Gas Price Wizard.
Always appreciate your time, Dan. Before I let you go, I know I've got my tree up. I usually wait till around my daughter's birthday, which was this past Monday. She turned 18. She can now vote. Very important. Had that discussion with her. But where are things with you now? You showed the tree in the box in the living room last week. Where's Dan McTeague and the preparations for holidays?
Tree is up, lights are on, but I haven't got the other ornaments on, and I need some help to do that. So I'll be working on that this weekend, hopefully with a wee toddy on the side.
Not a bad. So progress being made is what you're telling me.
That's correct. And I'm not in the garage yet. I will not be spending Christmas there. I promised myself, unlike previous years where not getting up in time has consequences.
Well, Dan, listen, always a pleasure. And as I said, it's at some point over the next couple of weeks, we'll have to exchange pictures of our Christmas tree, and then I'll get our editor, Liam, to edit those into the post-production side of this. How's that sound?
It's the deal, man. I'm there.
All right. Be well. Have a great day. Enjoy your weekend ahead, and we'll do it next week.
Take care, Scott. Thanks.
You too. Bye-bye.